Hi, everybody. So excited to see so many Second Shift members and friends of ours and our community who are here to learn from our member-led webinar hosted by Second Shift member Ashley Mann. This one's going to be really good. Ashley is a publicist who is an expert in public relations and brand strategy. And in this particular moment, when there's so much noise and there's so many social media channels, it's really hard to break out and have your message heard if you're a brand, if you're a small company, or even if you're just an individual contributor and somebody who wants to think of themselves as a brand and as a thought leader. Ashley is really a terrific example of a Second Shift member. I'm going to let her tell her own story, but I know that she has won, I think, at least 4 jobs she's been matched and filled through the Second Shift. So she's a terrific case study in how to transition from a full-time role to use the Second Shift to move into a more consulting basis, or to go off on your own if that's what you want to do. Set up her shingle. She has her own business, and now she's giving back to our community in this manner. And I love that ecosystem that we've built. And welcome. And I'll let you take it from here. But just a reminder, we're going to record this whole thing, and please ask any questions that you have in the Q&A at the end of Ashley's presentation. I'll go through all the questions and make sure that everything is answered by Ashley. So take it away. Thanks to everybody for being here.
All right. Thank you guys for joining today. I know we're getting close to the holidays, so everybody's schedules are jam-packed, so I appreciate your time. And as Jenny was saying, I am a Second Shift member. I went from having a full-time corporate career and just freelancing on the side to actually moving into freelancing full-time with my own shingle this year, because what better time than in the middle of a pandemic to start your own business. I've just so appreciated the opportunities I've gotten through the Second Shift. And like Jenny alluded to, I started off booking short projects. And I was telling her earlier that even the projects that I didn't end up booking that I interviewed for, those people have come back to me later on and introduced me to other people. And that's actually how I gained the majority of my clients that let me step out on my own full time. So I am eternally grateful to the Second Shift. I recommend keeping up on your pitches and going for as many of those opportunities as you can, because you never know where one connection can lead. So thank you, Jenny, for all you guys do. Okay.
You're very welcome. We're super proud of you.
Oh, good. Okay, so let me hop into the presentation here and let me do this here. Okay, can everybody see that? Okay, great.
You can see it. It looks great.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I thought I would start by introducing myself. So I am Ashley Mann. I have 15 years of PR experience working both for B2B companies. I started out doing consumer work, and then I ran marketing and brand internally for 5+ years at a couple of different companies. And then, as I think many moms do, at a certain point, I had this desire to spend more time with my kids. And I had freelanced on the side for a long time, and I thought, what's really keeping me from making the leap? And part of that was that there was just never a great place for me to find opportunities beyond my current connections. And when I found the Second Shift, that was really, it gave me a lot of confidence in my abilities working through their projects and realizing that I could do this on my own. And then it also helped introduce me to a couple of the clients that I have now. So for the past 4 months, I have been working full-time for myself under my own shingle. I absolutely love it. My most important job, I always say, is wife and mom. I have a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old. So times are definitely busy, but the wonderful thing about working for yourself is that you can kind of work whenever you need to, wherever you need to. So definitely very blessed for that experience. So one of the things I love most about being a publicist is that I never have the same day twice. So one day at the beginning of my career, I had to dress up as an elf for a condo opening. And I started to realize at that point, wow, this might not be your traditional desk day-to-day job, which was great for me. I have driven Keith Urban to AA as part of my job. I went to Walmart with Taylor Swift. And then I've also been woken up in the middle of the night by a Washington Post reporter saying he was going to write about my client who was just put into jail. So it is truly never the same. It's constantly changing, and the media is constantly changing, which is one of the things that I wanted to talk about today. So for today's presentation, we're going to go over some of my keys to PR, how you can kind of rise above the noise, and the things that have worked this year in what has been a really challenging year for a lot of different reasons, and kind of what we can expect to see moving into 2021. So what the heck happened to 2020? I think we all kind of have that sense when we look back on the past 12 months. It's been challenging from multiple different areas. And if you watched the news or read the press at all, it was pretty much a dumpster fire, lots of doom and gloom. The election, everything was inundated with all of this breaking news all of the time. I don't think I saw one fluffy feel-good news story on the Today Show for months. And I'm pretty sure Carson Daly was afraid for his job. So a couple of the PR and messaging challenges that came across this year. So early in the year, we had this real emphasis on equality. So how do you as a company stand up for your beliefs in a way that feels authentic without feeling like it's you're contributing a voice just to a greater message? There was a never-ending breaking news cycle like we discussed, a lot of remote work challenges as everybody shifted to working from their couches and balancing childcare. The new landscape presented a real challenge for businesses who relied on press or those that were coming out of the gates and trying to gain attention. So beyond just the new businesses that were launching and weren't able to get the attention that they were hoping for, a lot of older businesses also rely on filling their pipeline with press. And so this was a major change for them as well. A couple of specific changes that I noticed working through my clients that I wanted to bring up. As we've kind of mentioned already, the news cycle was incredibly hard to crack. There was a lot going on. And with that breaking news ticker across every broadcast, how is anything normal going to get through? Just like in many other industries, a lot of writers were furloughed or laid off this year as the pandemic continued. And in a world where the media has been really thinned out for several years, this last cut made things really hard for the remaining reporters. So like any of us that work at a company that lost a lot of employees, these people were being asked to write more stories than ever, while also struggling with the same remote work issues that we all were. You know, they might have toddlers running around while they're on deadline. They're trying to conduct interviews from their basement. Nobody was really immune to the issues that came with having to work remotely full-time. Events were on hiatus. So in many industries, specifically, you launch your products at an event during the year, and that's where you get the majority of your press and attention. So with all of the events going on hiatus, it removed another meeting place for brands in the media. Long lead time. So usually if you're pitching, say, a vertical publication that's something within your industry, you can conduct an interview and see a resulting piece within a week or two. But because the lead time was extrapolated with the pandemic and everybody working so much more and people struggling with different ways to get press, it really made planning and measuring results and coming up with a cadence really difficult. On the positive side, creativity ruled this year. So a lot of times there are some unspoken rules when it comes to pitching the media. There's a certain buttoned up way of going about things, but that really all went out the window this year, and gaining coverage however possible became the goal. So we even had a few on-camera interviews where everyone was giggling about the fact that they were wearing Lululemons underneath the camera lens. And so it kind of made for a more comfortable, transparent media process in a lot of ways. But it definitely meant that in order to get the same press that you've gotten in years before, you had to really think outside of the box. And we'll discuss a couple of ways that we did that here in just a minute. So we've covered a lot of the hard parts of this year and the kind of crappy things that happened, but I want to pivot and talk about the ways we can rise above this commotion, whether you're doing press for clients, whether you're trying to promote your own business, or like Jimmy alluded to earlier, whether you are trying to build a brand around yourself as a thought leader. So we've seen the unemployment rates and that many businesses are going under, but some of them are still rising and having success with their company messaging despite all these things going on. It doesn't matter if you're a mom and pop shop, a Fortune 500 company, a small business, everyone has a story to tell that's equally important. It's just a matter of how do you get it out there. So I think one of the most underrated and under-discussed parts of getting good media for your company is becoming a good storyteller. And this is something that you should be looking for when you hire somebody. If you're hiring somebody to help promote your brand, looking for somebody who has a good way of telling a story is really key. And then learning how to become a good storyteller yourself. So I'm not talking about spin, scandal storytelling where you're altering things, to put yourself in a situation. I'm talking about kind of the way our grandparents used to do it, where it was interesting, it was relevant, it always seemed to map back to some life experience you were having. But we have to learn how to do that in basically a nanosecond these days, because we're all on TikTok time and everybody wants to get the information and then scroll on to the next thing. So one thing I like to think about is leveraging the 30-second rule. So back when I started in PR, which I'm going to age myself, but it was a long time ago, we used to do call downs to newsrooms. So this isn't something that's commonly done anymore. Most of the pitching happens over email, thank goodness. But we used to have a media list and we would call every newsroom. And basically in the time between when they picked up and when they were putting the phone back down to hang up on you, you would have to try to convince them that your company had a story worth telling. So what this forced you to do was become really concise about what your angle was. And I think even though we're no longer doing the phone call method, leveraging the 30-second rule in your email pitching is just as important. People's phones might not be ringing off the hook anymore, but as everybody knows, there is a million things competing for your attention in your email inbox. So making sure that when somebody opens your email, they get to the point of what angle you're trying to make within 30 seconds of reading. So this can be really difficult, especially when you're working with maybe a higher tech client or something that takes a little more explanation. But I would argue that the most important thing is hooking their interest and they can follow up for more info afterwards. One key to sort of picking a good angle is being objective. And this can be especially hard if you're working with CEOs or founders of companies who, this thing they've put all their time and energy into this thing. This is their baby. Of course, they have the most interesting story to tell. Or maybe it's your company and you know all the cool things you're doing. You know how innovative you're being and nobody's paying attention and you're getting frustrated because you want to tell that story. Everything has to be looked through with an objective lens. So I like to think, okay, if I sent this email to my neighbor or my mailman, would he read this and be interested in continuing a conversation with me? If not, then you might have to pivot a little bit on the angle. For a lot of the big press, the more business press people or some of the big national TV shows, they're not going to have a bunch of knowledge about your industry specifically in most cases. So you have to find a way to get them intrigued and interested in learning more right off the bat. And I like to say, if you have a good story, the pitch will write itself. I know a lot of us who have worked with the media in the past, we've often come up with that blank word screen where you're staring at it and you just can't figure out how you want to tell this story in a short amount of words. And I've often found that if I'm stumped when I'm writing the pitch, maybe my story is not strong enough yet. Maybe I don't have quite the right angle. So speaking of angles, what makes a good one? So I have a couple things that I always look for when I'm writing a pitch to get some media traction for a client. The first is the topic needs to be timely and something people are currently writing about. So if something's going on in the world or your industry or on the news and you fit right into a story, excellent. It's much easier to land a pitch based on a topic that somebody's already writing versus convincing them to write on an entirely new topic. And this is relevant whether you're looking at the national news or you're pitching your vertical press about something happening within a very specific industry. One word of caution on this, especially considering the year that we've had, is we want to be really careful when we're piggybacking on negative news. So for instance, we've obviously been inundated with takeaways about the COVID pandemic for the last 10 months. There were a lot of companies that came in really effectively and provided information. And then there were companies that tried to leverage the pandemic sort of to their own benefit, I guess is the only way I would say that. And a lot of these companies have now been documented. Muckrack has a great article around 25 of the worst ways corporations tried to leverage the pandemic for their own good, which I'm happy to share. If you guys want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'll send you a link. It's definitely worth a read. But that's a case study in sort of what not to do. One of my clients works in the automotive industry, and one way we were able to land them some really good pieces earlier this year was by talking about the impact that the pandemic was going to have on the auto industry as a whole. So in this case, we were contributing to the conversation. Writers were writing about how the pandemic was going to affect a lot of different industries, and we just happened to have an expert in one of them that we were able to offer. So that's a way that you can do it effectively without compromising any integrity. The second thing that makes a good angle is it's educational. So another way to stand out is to provide a good takeaway for the reader. So a lot of contributed articles, which we'll talk about in a second, take this approach. So do you have any advice or something that the reader can take and implement themselves in a certain area, or can you provide more information on a set topic? Then definitely pitch it. If you have research to share, so have you talked to a bunch of your clients and they're doing things a certain way that's being more effective for them? That's a great angle to reach out with. Any type of data that you have that no one else has is a really interesting angle for the press. They always want to talk about something that no one else is talking about. The contrarian angle, this is my personal favorite. Many times the strongest angle is if you have a dissenting opinion about something. So do you or your CEO or another executive have a stance that runs a little counter to the norm? And can you back up that opinion with data? Is there a better way to do something that one of your clients can jump in and explain? And if it happens to use your software or something you're doing, great. These are all ways to get your voice into a larger conversation. And I see a lot of this around prediction pitches at the end of the year. So now that we're moving into January, different experts in different industries are starting to theorize about what's going to happen in 2021. And this is a chance for you to come out with something that's maybe a little bolder than what you would traditionally say. And then how are you being creative with your pitch? Are you doing something as a company in a unique or different way, or even as an individual? This is a great way for an individual to come out and talk about tips of how they've been successful during an otherwise difficult time. Is the company that you're working for really out of the box? Maybe your pitch is just super unique. One of my favorite pitches that I ever did for an old client was we did an entire news release that was memes. So typically news releases are really buttoned up. There's a certain structure. You release them on the wire. It's sort of a whole format that everyone has been using for the past, who knows how long, but it's been a long time. So our client decided they wanted to sort of turn things on their head, and they were getting some funding. And so we crafted a press release that was told completely through memes. So you had Grumpy Cat, you had all the little kid memes, and we ended up getting a lot of traction and a lot of press with that announcement, simply because it was just outside of the norm that people were used to reading, and it sort of broke things up for the media. So we actually ended up getting coverage on that announcement itself beyond just the news. So it was a pretty interesting case study of how sometimes stepping out of the box a little bit can make a really big difference. One thing I want to talk about before we dive deeper into the exact tactics that I think were more effective for 2020 is sort of redefining your success in a difficult year. Everybody wants a front page New York Times story, but very few companies are actually going to achieve that reality. So when you're creating your strategy, whether it's for yourself, for your own business, or for a client, you need to set your definitions of success and expectations up front. And sometimes the biggest hits don't even produce the most impactful results. So often we've seen better results and better traffic coming back to clients' websites from hitting vertical publications really thoroughly and really often versus maybe getting something in a more broad publication where not as many of your intended audience are reading. It's great for the ego when something hits in, a Wall Street Journal or a New York Times, or you're on the Today Show. But in certain cases, there might be other ways of achieving the same ROI with more feasible results. Okay, so now that we've kind of talked about all of the challenging things in 2020, I want to talk a little bit about what did work this year in PR. So proactive pitching, as we've discussed, was just really difficult. It went for product news as well. So the media just had less time and attention to give to the secondary stories. There was never really that dead time they had to fill like we've seen in most years. And unless you had some kind of relation to the other leading stories, it was a really tough, especially for the TV opportunities. But an alternative that we found that worked was real-time response pitching, which is also known as newsjacking. So it's when you're sending responses to something that's either breaking in the news, something that somebody just wrote about, or an incoming press query. So this can be a really good way to offer an expert to jump in yourself as an expert, or to offer a solution to something that a writer has recently been writing on. Obviously, events were canceled this year, but virtual events really jumped to the forefront. So they didn't provide the same cachet as an in-person experience, but more people than ever did attend these events because nobody had to travel. So I'll discuss this in a few slides, but 2021, I think our virtual event threshold is getting a little shorter. We're all a little tired of the Zoom, the Zoom meetings and the Zoom calls, but there are some ways you can leverage this to your advantage as well. And TV ops, like we've discussed, were extremely hard, but they were also being replaced with podcasts. So this was a huge year for podcasting. It's been a format that's been around for a while, but becoming a guest on a podcast started to rise up with a lot of my clients as something that they really wanted to do. So whether it was a national opportunity or something in a vertical space, it's such a great way for people to get their story out. And there is truly a podcast for every listener. So sometimes being on some of those more niche podcasts can really help get your story out to a very engaged audience. Okay, let's dive into these alternative tactics a little bit more. So the first is newsjacking or rapid response pitching. So this is really just when you hop on a relevant trend or a breaking news event as soon as you hear about it, and you offer expertise or a solution on the subject. So sometimes it can be reactionary. Someone writes something and you have a clear opinion and expert commentary about what was said, which can make for a perfect follow-up. Or in some cases, we've had writers amend their original story to include an interesting angle if you can provide something like that. Other times you might be preempting a story or a trend you anticipate. And then there's also the incoming request. So I'll give you guys some ideas of where you can look for those from the press side as well. So some tips for doing this successfully. You need to establish your credibility up front. So I'm going to really harp on this point because I think it's so important. The writer needs to understand why you are an expert in this area beyond just the fact that you have a product or company that sort of plays in this space. So whether it's saying, I'm the CEO of a company that solves XYZ problem, which you just wrote about. I'm an industry expert in blank space. I'm a health and wellness expert or a medical professional. Lead with that so that they know that what you're about to say in the rest of the pitch is valid. I also always suggest having quotes and tiny nuggets of content already approved and ready to go that you can provide when you're doing your pitch. So journalists have less time than ever for interviews this year, and having something that they could copy and paste as they're writing their next story, or they can reference as they're doing follow-ups, is really helpful. And I have had several pieces come out where I never even heard back on my initial pitch, but a quote that I had approved that was ready to go in that email was pulled into a different article. So make sure you're just making their job as easy for them as you possibly can, and providing succinct, ready to go content is one way to do that. As part of this, though, you're going to have to keep it non-promotional. So this is a little different if you're promoting yourself as an expert, then obviously you want them to cover you. But if you're promoting a product or a company, or just want to get a thought leader's voice in the space, it needs to be completely non-promotional. Otherwise, you're going to have a really tough time. And in a lot of these cases, the fastest response wins. So there are several services that you can sign up for that provide media leads. So Haro is one of the originals. They send an email every day that journalists can request sources for stories they might be working on. And then ProfNet and Quoted are really the same thing. But basically, if you can subscribe to these and you see something where you think you or your client might be a fit, fastest response wins. So you have to really prioritize starting your day by looking through these and sending out emails as quickly as you can. Another thing I would suggest is setting Google alerts for the industries that you're working within. So whether it's tracking where your competitors are being covered and trying to insert yourself into the story that way, tracking the industry as a whole so you have an idea of the trends and what's breaking in the news, or tracking the reporters that you really want to get in touch with. You can really learn a lot about somebody by studying what they're writing about currently or have written about in the past. And Twitter is also a good place to check for this sort of thing too, because a lot of the times if you're following relevant people, they will pose a question to their Twitter before they will actually sign up for one of these services to get a source secured. Okay, second angle that I thought worked really well in 2020, and that I always recommend having a strong program around this, whether you are promoting yourself or a company, is have a plan for thought leadership. So one way that you can run an effective thought leadership program beyond going out and speaking and sort of leveraging yourself is through contributed articles. So these are articles in different publications that look like the publication wrote them in most cases, but your name or your subject matter expert's name is in the byline. So the great thing about having a contributed article program is that you as the writer control the message. So it can be nice to talk about an up and coming trend this way, or you can pass along the educational content like we were talking about before. And when you're pitching a contributed article, most of the time you want to just develop an abstract to include. So you'll go through your pitch, you'll talk about why it's interesting. And then at the bottom, I like to give a little preview of what I envision the article will look like. It's really just helping the journalist make that leap from your pitch to a published piece. So usually these abstracts include a headline that I've drafted. I write a paragraph that sort of hooks the reader right up front and then explains what they'll learn through the rest of the piece. And then really leave it to the journalist I'm pitching from there. So I've had really great success with this. Usually the writers love having something developed that they can use to fill content on their sites, especially online. And I think it's really a cornerstone of what you need to have with any good PR program. A couple of things to note about this. It must be exclusive for most outlets, including the big ones. So this means that if there's a topic that you want to write about, or there's a blog post that you've written that you haven't published yet that you think would be a great article, wait before you put it on your company site or your LinkedIn. The outlets that you're pitching will check. And if it's not exclusive, and a lot of times you can lose the opportunity. In my experience, lists are a top performer. So it could be 5 ways to expand productivity working remotely. Don't pitch that one. There's been 75 stories about it already, I'm sure. But if there's something in your specific industry that you can talk about that you're an expert in, the writers love takeaways. So anything that you can say that is actionable for their readers usually gets a good response. This doesn't necessarily mean that you're using all of your insights on one topic with one outlet. What you can do is take that same topic and spin it into several different abstracts. So maybe you have one that goes out to the bigger business press about a general business angle. And then you work in manufacturing. So you're going to target some of the manufacturing publications with a more scaled down version of the same article. That's completely okay. They just have to be different enough to be exclusive for each outlet. So usually that means that 80% or more of the content needs to be new, but the topic can often be the same. Okay, virtual events. This was a space where creativity really ruled this year. As more and more in-person events were canceled, we started to see this swell of virtual events instead. And I think at the beginning of the pandemic, the tolerance for these types of events was really high. It was kind of exciting. You didn't have to be away from home. You could go to go to whatever conference you wanted to go to from your couch. But I do think the enthusiasm for them is waning a little bit as we move into 2021. So this is sort of a new opportunity for you to get creative. One way to spin a virtual event to your client's advantage or to your advantage if you're trying to get a meeting with the press is pitching the press around the times of the event. So you'll know if press are attending events by obtaining a press list from the event organizer. Usually you have to be also attending the event to see these or be sponsoring the event, but a lot of places do send them out. And then leverage knowing that the writer is going to be attending this event in order to secure a meeting. So a lot of times reporters are sent to these expos to listen in on the sessions and then also meet with a bunch of different companies in the space. So we've been noticing that a lot of them are still leaving those meeting times open before and after the event. So knowing this, you can reach out to them and say, hey, I know that you're going to be virtually attending X, Y, and Z conference. I would love to get some time with you on Saturday after this session, and sort of pitch it the same way you would do an in-person event. Another thing we saw this year was that speaker slots are more competitive than ever. So now that everyone has the ability to speak from their living room couches, the speaking gigs just became a lot more popular. So something to keep in mind as you're making plans for 2021. I anticipate that this will continue. I don't see us having in-person events in most areas in the country until later next year. So the podcast medium has been rising for a while, but we saw a real big jump with the pandemic. There are more podcasts available now than ever before, and literally podcasts for every vertical you can imagine. If you make bike tires, there is, I'm sure, a bike tire podcast that you can become a guest on. And this was a really great way for clients to sort of tap into a really well-defined audience. And then obviously, if you can get on the national podcast, which is becoming very challenging now, a great way to sort of expand your brand story broader as well. So a couple things we've learned from pitching a bunch of podcast guests that you guys can take away from this. It's really helpful to include sample clips or other speaking engagements, videos of other speaking engagements that you've been a part of. You need to have a strong bio that emphasizes your experience and your connections. So whether your connections are where you were educated or different associations that you're a part of, or whether they are naming customers. So maybe you do work with Facebook and Dyson and you want to leverage that for your presentation or for your podcast speech. Those are all good things to include in your pitch. We've also seen that some of the bigger podcasts will not have a guest on unless they have several smaller podcasts under their belt. And so in turn, some of these smaller podcasts are beginning to charge to be a speaker on their show. So just something to keep in mind, if this is a program you're wanting to embark on, it might be smart to set a little money aside initially to get the first few under your belt, especially if you don't have a background in live speaking. Okay, finding the right person to pitch. So we've outlined a bunch of different strategies, some new things that have worked well for 2020 that I am anticipating will also continue to work for 2021. We have a lot of tactics in our arsenal. How do you actually find the person that you want to pitch? So my first piece of advice is to ditch all the media databases. So Cision, Muckrack, they're really expensive. I think they're out of date, and these people are receiving 1 million pitches a day by a ton of other companies and a lot of other PR people. So you really want to do your research on who has covered the space that you're hoping to get in within the last 3 months. I send fewer pitches now than ever to fewer targets. And the more that I target my list, the better my results. So the reason I say the last 3 months as well, which kind of seems like a short time period, is because we're just seeing so much movement and so much turnover in the media space right now, that even lists that I've compiled 6 months ago, a lot of those contacts are no longer at those publications or they've been shifted into a different beat. So I usually like to start with 10 or 15 people that I'm going to reach out to and take some time to really get to know them. So that includes reading their past articles, get a sense for what angles they've written about before. What is their vibe? Are they, rah supporter of all things business, or are they a little more challenging and a little more difficult? How in depth do they like to get about the things that they write about? This can help you tailor a pitch to them accordingly. And as we talk about tailoring pitches, do anything you can to establish a connection to these people. So you have to realize that they are getting thousands of emails, in some cases a day, with a lot of people trying to do the same exact thing that you're doing. So how are you going to stand out? One way is by doing more research than anybody else, be more familiar with what they're interested in, be able to have a conversation about a prior up front, like we've talked about a lot. Talk about your point of view and emphasize. You can get to the point in your pitch, the better you're going to be. And then there's other things too. Check out their LinkedIn. Maybe you guys went to the same college. Anything that you can drop in that will make you stand out from everybody else is a positive. And then keep it simple. So we want to give them everything they need to mention in an article, even if they never respond to you. So I said this before, we've seen this happen a few different times of having a mention in a piece come through our media tracker from somebody that never even responded to our initial pitch. So we just thought that they weren't interested. As it turned out, because we had things already compiled and ready to go, we were able to secure those opportunities. This can mean that you have a list of pre-approved quotes at the bottom of your pitch. In some cases, that is interesting if you can provide something from a customer and from your CEO. Or maybe it's you're the expert and you want to try to build your brand and you have a list of quotes attributed to yourself that you can give the media. Anything you can really do at this point to make their job easier is only going to be better for you. Okay, now a couple of general media guidelines as we start to talk about doing some outreach here with some of our new tactics. Media, they're just like us. This is only funny if you read people and you always see that celebrity thing where it's like celebrities, they're just like us and they're grocery shopping and they're doing all these other things. This relates to the media too. And I think a lot of times we have sort of this God complex when it comes to dealing with people who write for certain publications. And at the end of the day, you need to remember that they are going through their email every day, just the same way that we are. They can tell if you're mail merging the same email to 1,000 other people. Nobody appreciates that. If you haven't taken the time to research them and you're pitching them on things that are not at all relevant to what they're covering now, you'll probably get deleted. I do have a couple of reporters that I work with where if you pitch them more than once with an off-topic angle, they will just block your email address. So it's sort of like a first impression with meeting somebody. In a lot of cases, you only get one chance to secure a piece or make a connection or foster a relationship. So I just encourage everyone to take that really seriously because you never know when you'll want to reach out to these people in the future, and being respectful of their time and your time is just good business practice. Reread your pitch before you send it. I said this earlier, but is it something that your neighbor would read the whole thing and be interested in the story? Especially when we're pitching top tier press, they are trying to appeal to a very wide range of readers. So it has to be interesting, not only for Joe down the block, but also Susie upstairs. It needs to be something where they're going to have a lot of readers from a lot of different areas of life. And something I neglected to mention earlier, but I think is worth bringing up, is especially for outlets that have a really strong online presence, or they publish most things online, they're looking for clicks just like anybody else. So the more interesting you can make your headlines, the more interesting your angles, the more clicks that they think they will generate from running a piece about your company or you personally, the better off your chances. And then last but not least, be clear about what you're asking and offering and leave that on the table. So when you're sending a pitch out to somebody, be very clear about, hey, offering an interview with X, Y, and Z, and this is why they are experts in their space. Be very clear about what you want them to cover if you have a new product that's coming out. Just really making the email succinct, getting to the point of your angle, and leaving nothing on the table is really the best way to engage with the media. Okay, so I feel like I have completely bombarded everybody with information here. But let me stop sharing this here.
That was terrific. I learned so
good.
much. And
Oh, good.
ask people to send questions in the Q&A that they have, but I have a few questions to start with.
Sure. Great.
So in your case, like you're professionally a publicist, so you're reaching out on behalf of clients. And so
Yes.
there's like a third party medium where you have a purpose for reaching out. Sometimes
Yes.
I feel like people could be nervous and it feels awkward to reach out on behalf of themselves without a person who's doing it for them. How do you suggest they get over that, or will people be as receptive without an intermediary who is, an expert, vetted, whatever?
Yes. Yeah, I honestly think that you're in an advantage sometimes if you are reaching out effectively yourself. So sometimes representing yourself, as long as you're doing it in a way that meets all the normal guidelines, you've researched what they're writing about, you have a really interesting opinion. A lot of ways it removes the middleman. Not that I want to like put myself out of business here, but if you have some good tactics and you feel skilled enough to do that yourself, a lot of times it removes the middleman. So you should definitely feel confident with reaching out with your own expertise. I have never met a journalist that did not want to deal directly with somebody who had an interesting story to tell. So it shouldn't be a barrier to entry for anybody.
Okay. Now let's talk about like the pay for play thing.
Yeah.
Because I think that's getting to be more and more common, whether it's like people reaching out through LinkedIn on podcasts saying like, we'd love you to be on the podcast and we have this podcast company, but it's going to cost you X amount of money. Or even like contributors to big ticket magazines now want some sort of contribution in some way to be a contributed writer.
Yeah.
How does that all work? And is it worth it?
I think it really depends on the opportunity. Like we talked about earlier, there are just fewer journalists and fewer writers. So in a way, it's an easy way for them to sort of vet content. They have another stream coming in that somebody's paying for. I think if it is a Forbes Tech Council, for instance, that you have to pay to be a part of, that you're featured monthly along with a lot of other really impressive CEOs, then maybe that's something you can derive some ROI from. I think for the most part, anyone who's pitching you specifically with an email in your inbox or a LinkedIn note, like you were saying, I usually recommend vetting those out. It would really have to be something that you decide you want to pursue first without them coming to you in most cases.
And what about LinkedIn? We had heard at the beginning of the pandemic that LinkedIn was people were really responding to LinkedIn more so even than like emails. And that it was a really great way to be direct. How do you think people could use LinkedIn to promote their own brand, to promote themselves as thought leaders, and then try to use that to get coverage?
Yeah, I think the first thing with LinkedIn is make sure you're producing interesting content yourself that you're sharing to your profile. And then don't be afraid to ask for connections. So a lot of these media people are used to many people asking them to connect. So it's not seen as a faux pas or anything in most cases. I tend to avoid pitching directly on LinkedIn just as a respect thing. Like I'll go through their email first before, reaching out directly on a personal medium. But I do think there is more of that going on now with LinkedIn, especially. And if you can make some connections and then you start posting interesting content that maybe they're seeing, that can be one way.
All right. Well, those were my questions. Does anybody else have any questions that they would like to ask? We have a few more minutes, so I welcome any questions that people have. I don't see anything written here. I mean, I can keep going. But,
one other thing I wanted to mention too that I didn't say in the presentation, but it can often be hard to find email addresses or contact information for a lot of these media people. And that is
especially in TV. You never know who's doing what, who's actually the person. Half the time they're freelancers. So they're not really it's not the person who's on the masthead necessarily who's actually the person who's going to hire you.
Yes, exactly. So there are a couple of tools you can use. One is called Hunter. It's a Chrome extension. And anytime you go to a media website, you can click on it and it'll pop down with a directory of all the emails of that website. You can search for somebody once you found the contact that you're hoping to target. So that can be a really good way. You can also use their tool to vet email addresses. So if you have a media list that's a little bit older and you want to go through and see who's still relevant to their space, you can import the email addresses. It'll tell you who's still where they were previously, which is a good time saver. And then, good old Google, first, last at outlet.com, see if it pops up. That's usually a good way to find if they've ever published it anywhere on the web. But the media are just really stingy with sharing stuff because they've been pitched so many times by so many people that in a lot of cases, they like to make you do your work. So
I like that. I think that's great. And, people still answer the phone in some,
yes,
especially in like TV world.
Yes.
You can still call and
yes,
somebody will answer a phone. Maybe not in this exact moment. I don't know if people are actually in offices, but it, if you're wily and, tenacious, you can get somebody on a phone.
Definitely. And not very many people are doing that anymore. So in a way, it's sort of a way to stand out, especially if you have a strong story and you can articulate it really well.
Okay, well, if no one's got any questions, I think we could wrap this up. But first, I think you should tell us where, oh wait, hold on, of course now. Do you find that end consumers, viewers, readers, etc., are craving different kinds of content and messaging since the beginning of COVID, asks Meg.
Well, I think we're all having a little COVID fatigue. I have noticed in the past month or so, the resurgence of some of the other articles that maybe would have been pushed down with news about the election or COVID or something else going on. I think we're all craving interesting stories that are not related to the pandemic, entertaining content more than ever. I talked a little bit about lists. We always see those perform well, 5 ways to do X, 10 reasons that Y. So yeah, I think more than ever, people are spending more time online and on their phones now that we're all at home. We're not commuting and doing a lot of the things that we would normally do. So they're taking that extra time to search for more interesting content. And a lot of it is going beyond the main media places that we're used to consuming content from. So when everything is doom and gloom on one place, people are going to eventually move somewhere else to look for, things to read and things to keep them entertained. So
cool. How do people find you? If somebody wants to hire you or just connect with you and through our member community.
Yeah, definitely. So you can definitely find me on LinkedIn. I'm there, Ashley Mann. My business name is Pine Grove PR. So I have a website. It's pinegrovepr.com. Or you can reach out to me at ashley@pinegrovepr.com. And I am always more than willing to sit and chat with second shift members. So happy to help in any way I can.
This has been such a pleasure. I really, your story is inspiring. It makes me feel happy as the team of Second Shift that's on, and just being able to see a success story and to know that also happened in the last 4 months when everything seems really like a bummer. To know that there are stories of people who are really finding a way to survive and thrive in this moment, and that we've been able to help facilitate that makes me feel really, really good. So thank you for doing this. Thank you so much for taking your time and to give back to everybody. I hope everybody has a very happy, safe, and obviously healthy holiday season. And it's going to be 2021 soon. So let's just be ready for that. All around.
I love it. Thanks again for the opportunity and for everything that you guys do. I'm very thankful. So
thank you so much, Ashley. Take care, everybody.
Take care.